You're listening to the Talent Therapy Podcast. Here, you'll find discussions around recruiting trends and best practices with talent acquisition leaders in the biotechnology and pharmaceutical industries so that you and your team are informed and up to date in an ever-evolving space. And now, here's your host, Chris Tamburini.
All right, Shaun Vigeant, welcome to the Talent Therapy Podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. I'd like to start off this recording the way that I start off all these recordings. And I would love for you to share with the audience how you got into recruiting and talent acquisition. I'd be curious to hear about your journey.
Absolutely. I've heard a lot of the other episodes you've had, so I think it's going to be a similar tale where nobody grows up and goes to college and thinks to themselves, man, I want to be a recruiter when I grow up. Usually you kind of fall into it, and that's what happened to me. I went to school with the thought process that I wanted to either go down like the marketing path, that's what my degree was in, or some sort of sales route, because I had a lot of people in my family that were successful in sales. And it's something I always felt like I was pretty good at. So when I graduated college, way back when at this point, I found this job at this company, Apex Systems, which at the time was one of the largest tech staffing companies in the world. And it was a compelling opportunity where you could come in and recruit, but ultimately move into sales and sort of grow my career that way. So I was like, that sounds good. I love talking to people. Seemed like decent opportunity to make some money, and we'll see what this thing's about. So that's how I fell into it right out of school. And interestingly enough, I did move through the recruiting track really quickly there and moved into sales. But then I actually realized, I think I like the recruiting side of it better. So I after a couple of years, I moved over to a company, Beacon Hill Staffing Group, because I wanted to get back into recruiting. And there really wasn't that opportunity where I was. And I stayed at Beacon Hill for a long time, loved it, loved my time there, and then decided I wanted to move into the corporate side because to me, it was about more than just recruiting. I was always fascinated about one of the things I was always fascinated about on the agency side was, okay, well, what makes somebody successful at this client versus this client? And it's interesting that you could be looking for the same skill set, but depending on the type of company and the type of team that they're going to be working in, it might work one place and not work the other. So I really wanted to get into a company where I could have the opportunity to really invest all my time in building an awesome organization with a great culture. So made the switch to corporate, and I've bounced around a little bit in the corporate world, but I've been at my current company, Intellia, for a little over 6.5 years, and it's been fun.
Yeah, it's a good journey. It actually looks pretty familiar how you started off. I started off almost the same exact path. I did not go into the corporate side, but I like the reasons for you going into the corporate side. And, I'm kind of curious, you've been there for 6.5 years, which is a really long time nowadays for someone to be in a TA role for 6.5 years, the same company. So I got to imagine from when you arrived at Intellia until now, things have changed drastically. So I'd be curious, and I guarantee the audience would be curious to hear about what it was like when you got there from a TA perspective versus what it looks like now.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's not a short answer.
Yeah, I'll do it as concise as I can.
No, take your time.
Yeah, when I got here, no one knew who the science in and of itself, CRISPR. Nobody, myself included, I didn't really know what it was. Hadn't really heard of it, other than at a very high level. No one knew who Intellia Therapeutics was, unless you were really plugged in to the space. So that presented a lot of challenges from a recruiting and an attraction perspective, because at that time it was, the market was not how it is today. So there was a lot of opportunity out there. And when I got there, one of the compelling things that got me to join the organization was that they really didn't have anything from a talent acquisition perspective. They had a contract recruiter sitting on site. They were heavily leveraged with an RPO model. So they had a third-party company doing a huge chunk of their hiring. And they had built some sort of foundational processes, like they had an applicant tracking system to track things. They had a basic referral program. But beyond that, it was sort of a greenfield. And that's what was attractive to me, because coming out of a big company like Biogen, where I was right before here, another awesome organization, one of the things that I didn't love about Biogen, or not that I didn't love, was that everything was already established. So it's in terms of impact and what you can do and what you could build and what you could, implement, there wasn't a ton of opportunity there because they had a great framework already set up. So when I got there, it was a little bit of steering the ship while I was building the ship. We were in a huge hiring growth mode when I joined the company, which has since continued pretty much my entire time there. But I was also building a lot of processes as I went, putting in place a campus program, putting in place a more robust referral program, employment branding work. How do we market ourselves? Where's our presence? How do we want to interview people? What's our interview process? How do we want to, it's just soup to nuts. I could go into a million details, but soup to nuts, ground up, build. And that we've sort of continued to build on that as time has gone on. And it's always an iterative process. Like, I'll give you an example. When I got there, they had 10, 12, 14 people interviewing every candidate. It was one of those small company feels where it's everybody knows everybody, and it's everybody wanted to be a part of the process. And we'll probably touch on this stuff later, but candidate experience to me is king. And you always want to provide the best experience to people, whether you hire them or don't hire them. And interviewing with 12 or 14 or 15 people for an entry-level job is not a good candidate experience. So it's an iterative process. So I wasn't going to just go from 12 to 14 people to 5 people on an interview team. So we started small and I got everyone to buy into, let's cap it at 8 people. And then that was good for a little while, but I ultimately wanted to get down to 4 or 5, which is where we've been for the last couple of years. So you sort of chip away at it and you figure out what your vision is and where you want to get, and then you just sort of build towards that as you go. And I've been very lucky that the company really respects and trusts talent acquisition. We've built a really good reputation during my time there. So I've had an opportunity to get buy-in on a lot of really good processes that I think has put us in a good place and makes us one of the leaders out there.
That's great. 15 people. 15 people is not great.
No, it was nuts. People would be exhausted at the end of the interview. It was just, very inefficient. But they didn't know. It's,
of course, to
them, it's the person has the opportunity to meet with all of us. What an awesome experience. And I get that. But they don't look at it from the other side.
Yeah. No, of course. I mean, well, it sounds like you came in pretty quickly and cleaned that up. So, on that note, when it comes to some of those processes that you implemented, how much of that do you think you took from your experience in agency? How much of that do you think you took from your prior experience at Biogen, and kind of, for lack of a better term, copied that and then implemented it into Intellia? And how much of it do you think you maybe just figured out on your own or figured out what was best for Intellia? I'd be curious to hear what your thought process was when it came to optimizing some of those processes.
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. I would say a lot of it is certainly things I've seen in the past. I also really respect and rely on my network. One of the amazing things that Biogen did is there are so many people that were my colleagues when I was there that are now, heads of TAs or heads of HR at other biotechs, and we all stay in touch and we have a network. And so I rely on other people too for ideas. I don't want to just create everything on my own, right? Some people are already doing things really well. So I like to understand what's happening out there and then decide, what do I want to take? What do I want to maybe tweak? So there were some things that I certainly saw at Biogen that I took with me. And then there were some things like the interview example, the interview panel. It's it's a little bit of my gut instinct. I feel like if we could create a really strategic interview process, you don't need that many people to get all the information that you need to make an informed decision. But things like our internal mobility policy, I love the way that they did that at Biogen. So I basically replicated that here at Intellia, the way that we wrote that policy and the way that we utilize it. Things like the campus program. I actually talked extensively after I got here to the individual who ran that program at Biogen to understand, how do you pay these people? How do you go recruit them? How do you differentiate? So a lot of what we do from a campus perspective, initially anyway, was similar to what we did at Biogen. But the things like the referral program, I just came up with on my own. We branded it, we tweaked it. We have some unique sort of aspects to it that are really favorable internally. So it's, long story short, it's a combination of taking full on ways you've seen it before and as close to replicating it as possible. Some things from scratch, just, I think this would be a great idea, let's try it. And then some things are from other companies and the way that other people I know are doing it, and then just making some subtle tweaks.
Yeah. Here's another question for you that I just thought of as you were
Yeah.
talking. You've obviously grown a team there, right? You probably started off, it sounded like when you started off, it was you, a contract recruiter, and an RPO, and it's since shifted probably to an extreme extent, right? Very different
Yep.
than what it is now. So how much have you taken from individuals that you've hired on your team to kind of create some processes? Have they come up with a lot of different ideas, or do you think it's mainly been just you and your experiences?
No, I've taken a lot from the people I've hired. I mean, early on, I will say it was probably a lot of me, only because, it was the priority for the people that I hired was, we need to fill a ton of jobs. Like, we are, drinking from a fire hose. So that was their focus. I'm like, I just need you all to really focus. And I would bounce ideas off them, but I was sort of trying to alleviate them from a lot of the process stuff so that they could just execute on the hiring goals. But then as we've grown, a couple of really key hires that I brought into the team. First, I brought in someone to sort of oversee TA operations. This was about 4 years ago. And that individual, her name is Brittany, huge. She was immense in helping us from an operations and a systems perspective, and setting everything up from an ATS standpoint, offer process standpoint. How do we do background checks? How do we onboard people? How do we streamline the way that we do our work and make recruiters' jobs as easy as possible? Because most recruiters hate process. Process is just the barrier to everything that they're trying to do. And I'm in that boat too, as a recruiter. So I look to her still today to tell me, like, how do we do this? How do we action on this? So she was immense. And the other hire that I made was someone that specializes in, DEI initiatives, employment branding. Her name's Maritza. She was a campus recruiter in the past. So she's really helped take the, let's call it, basic foundation level work that I did in these areas, and because she's an expert, made them better. And then on the recruiting front, I've really hired some strong people who all of them have an agency background with some corporate experience. And I look to them all the time. They have breadth of knowledge and experiences at different companies that, if I have an idea, how do you think hiring managers are going to react to this? Or what do you think about this? And they bring ideas to me too. So it's been a team effort.
That's great. So you mentioned Brittany. I actually know Brittany. I used to work with her at Aerotech, and
There you go.
I can attest she's very process oriented. So you're lucky to have her.
Yes.
So, all right. No, that's good insight. I appreciate that. And it's good to hear your experiences really leveraging the people that you brought in, plus your own experiences. And I feel like that's a really good way to do it. Well, let's talk about this. And this actually it probably relates to things you did when you first got to Intellia and also relevant to things that you're doing now. And that's really influencing leadership. And influencing leadership is a topic I think you and I decided we wanted to talk about. And
Yep.
there's so many different angles to it. And I think we could start off with, how did you get the leadership team to buy in to reduce your interview panel from 15 to 4? And now, how are you influencing leadership when it comes to whittling down requirements and really getting them to see what it is they should and should not be focusing on? So it's a really, really broad area, but, I'm going to turn it to you and kind of get your take on when it comes to influencing leadership from a TA perspective, what does that mean to you?
Yeah. I think that I would say most leadership teams are probably similar to our leadership team here, just in this regard, very data driven. So one of the things I learned early on when I would go to the leadership team is they wanted data. They wanted to understand what's it going to mean for us? How are we going to measure it? What's success look like? Why do we need to do this? What are the advantages to doing it? What happens if we decide not to do it? So I can't just walk into the room and say, I want to reduce the interview team from 12 down to no more than 5. They're going to have a million questions, and if I don't have the answers to those questions and I'm not prepared, I'm not going to get anywhere. So one of the approaches I always take anytime I'm going to present to the leadership team is I try to think through, okay, what's the story that I'm trying to tell them? What do I need from them? What are the types of questions that they're likely going to ask me? And I prepare that all in advance in the slides, and I'll always send them a pre-read the day before so they can look at it. And I'll usually call out in my email to them sort of the key highlights. So that way, when I get into that discussion, I'm already sort of a leg up in terms of, presenting this opportunity. And I'll use the interview team thing as the example specifically, because when I went to them, what I did is I created, okay, this is what we're doing today. And I literally did it in numbers, very basic. This is how long our average interview is. When we have 12 people interviewing, it equates out to 6 hours per candidate. If we're interviewing on average 4 candidates to make a hiring decision, that equates to this number of hours. If we reduce it, just on a strict man hours standpoint, this is how much time we're going to free up our employees to be able to either work in the lab or just whatever type of work they're doing.
Yeah.
And that was like the light switch that went off to them. And then I followed that up with, and this is how we're still going to get all the information that we need with only having 5 people interview candidates. So we're not going to lose any of that. Here's the plan for that. But just on the surface, this is how many hours, in my mind, we are wasting on interviews when that's not people's job. That's my team's job, but that's not their job. So things like that, where you need to understand how are they going to look at it from their seat, what's going to be important to them, and then coming in with those facts and that data to show them. I'll give you another other example. Another big thing that we did a couple of years ago was we implemented an MSP, because I was starting to see that we had a lot of contractors and consultants at the company, but we didn't really have a formal non-employee program or policy. And it was a little messy. We had some people that were just working direct with the business. Some people, we knew we were tracking them, like we helped bring them on board. It was just a little all over the place. And I felt like we were at a time where we should bring in an MSP. But that's a big change for a company. So when I went to them, it's just, this is what I want to do. Here's the different MSPs that we looked at. And here's the pros and cons of the MSPs. This is what other companies are doing. These are other clients that these different MSPs are at. This is what the process means. And you really just break it down for them that way. They don't need every ounce of data. They just want to understand, why do we need to do this? What's the benefit? and if you can explain that in a way that's makes a lot of sense to them, it becomes easy to to influence the decision. So when you do that over time, the credibility and the trust and it just continues to build. And that's what we've been able to do. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but that's what I would say.
No, that's great. It does answer the question. Side note, I'd be curious, do you remember how many hours the interview process was taking, or maybe like how many hours were being wasted, if you will? Do you have an idea? I know it was a while ago, but do you remember?
I don't remember offhand. I could always pull up find the old slide deck, but it was, if you had 12 people on average, most of our interviews are about 30 minutes each. So you're talking about 6 hours per interview. And then it's usually about 3 to 4 people per interview. So you're talking about, 25 approximately hours to make a hiring decision. Whereas now, we're down to, less than 10 on average. So when you look over the course of the year, if you're doing, 3, 4, 5, 6, 700 interviews, like panel interviews, that number the amount of hours, if you're saving, 12 to 15 hours just per interview, multiply that out over, hundreds of interviews. It's like thousands of hours. It's tremendous. Just to be a little bit more efficient. Yeah. And side note, the separate thing to that is it creates an incredibly better, like 5-star, top-notch candidate experience.
Yeah, well, that's a perfect segue to the next topic, which is the candidate experience, and that's clearly a part of it. And in addition to that, don't let me forget this. The other thing I want to talk about is what the hiring team's experience is as well. It's something that I don't think we've ever talked about on this podcast. Okay. You've actually mentioned it a little bit, and I think someone who is heading up TA, I think it's important for you and heads of TA to really make sure that the hiring process for the hiring team runs smoothly as well. Something that's probably been neglected, but we'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, the candidate experience, obviously you're passionate about that. We've already talked about it, just reducing an interview panel from 15 to 4 is clearly going to enhance the candidate experience, but you put a lot of work into that. So curious to hear your thoughts on what is it about the candidate experience that is so important to you?
It's a tough one. It's a tough one. There's so many aspects of it, but I think ultimately you're going to reject way more people than you hire. And what you want to do every time, first of all, this is a stressful process for anyone on the outside. Interviewing is not fun. I don't think there's many people that just love interviewing for jobs. It's stressful. If you're unemployed, if you've been unemployed for a bit, it gets more and more stressful. It compounds. So there's a lot of anxiety with candidates that are interviewing. And one of the things that I've always noticed, whether it was in the agency world or in the corporate world, or just as a candidate myself in the past, the majority of companies never got back to me unless they wanted to move forward with an offer. And it used to really frustrate me because it's
wild.
It's like I spent hours interviewing with you, and, before COVID, it's like I had to get my suit pressed, and, I came into the office and I took a half day at work, or I took a day off at work to come interview. And just because you don't want to hire me, you couldn't even send me an email to say, we're really sorry, like we decided to go with another candidate, just something as basic as that. So to me, that's something that we talk about with the recruiters all the time, and it's really important to me, is that we are always closing the loop with candidates. Because what happens is the people that you don't hire, they're out there and they're networking, and they're going to hear your company name at some point, or they're going to go on Glassdoor and blast you, or, maybe they were a good candidate and maybe you would want to hire them again in the future. Well, why do you not want to create just an optimal experience where they're saying at the end of the process, I'm so glad you let me know that I didn't get the job. I'm really bummed, but please keep me in mind. I would love to work at your company at some point in the future. So to me, that's what it's all about. It's building those relationships and building that reputation. And this all feeds into what your employer brand is and how you're viewed externally by the market and by candidates, and what's that perception out there. It's so easy to do, and it's completely, there's not many things, I say this to a lot of people, there's not many things in this business that we can control because we're dealing with people. But there's a few things that we can control, and following up with people and sending a note and dispositioning candidates and letting them know that they didn't get the job and giving them that courtesy and that closure is fully in our control. There's
Absolutely.
never a reason that we can't do that. So it's light effort, low effort to do, and huge impact. Because I'm sure you see this too. You get told all the time by candidates, "Oh, thank you." They're almost as appreciative as if you offered them the job, just that you let them know that they didn't get the job.
I was going to say, not to cut you off, but I was going to say, it's amazing how grateful they are just for that feedback that you've closed the loop. And just give them some constructive feedback, about where they fell short in the interview, or maybe where the other candidate excelled, or just what the differences were. They appreciate that honesty. And it's such a simple thing, and it goes such a long way. And to me, it's like, well, yeah, that's what you should be doing as a TA consultant or a recruiter. I know you're still telling the story, but I got to use this opportunity to tell this quick story. So I don't think I've ever talked about this. I definitely haven't talked about this story on this forum. And so I interviewed with another recruiting firm. This was probably like 8 or 9 years ago. And keep in mind, they were a recruiting firm, right? Their goal was to be the best recruiting platform that existed, right?
Yep.
Big firm. Went on 3 interviews, had a dinner with the hiring team. They had some executives fly in, had a great meeting with them, and nothing, not even an email saying, "Hey, Chris, we decided to go with another candidate," just zero. And I was really surprised based on how much time I had spent with these guys. And hey, if I'm not the right candidate or I didn't have the right skills at the time, that's fine. But not even a quick note to say, "Hey, Chris, we want another candidate." It was absolute crickets. It just blew my mind. I was like, well, that's, probably not an organization I probably want to work at anyway. If you spend that much time and you spend that much effort and you don't get that reciprocation, just closed loop at the end, it's odd. But to your point, going back to you and what's important to you about candidate experience, that is such a little detail in my mind, but goes such a long way.
Yeah. And you know what I love about your story? I don't love that happened, but it's 9 years later and you still, I would never work for that company.
Yeah.
And it's, that's the impact little things like that have on a candidate, it like that far down the road, it's unbelievable. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, no problem.
The only other thing I would say is on the other side of it, you have the candidates that you don't hire, but then what about the candidates that you do hire? You want them to come in, and one of the, awesome things that I've had an opportunity to do in recent years is to present to the new hire orientation classes at various stages. And one of the things that they always, because I ask, one of the things that they tell me consistently is, this is by far the best interview process of any company I've ever been at. From the responsiveness of the coordinators and the schedulers and the way they treated me, from the actual interview itself and how it's a streamlined and efficient process, to the way that the recruiter managed the process and was there for me every step of the way. So that's what you want. You want to create that experience, end to end on the candidate side, whether you do move forward or you don't.
Absolutely. And it's so fundamental to me and obviously to you.
Yep.
And I think if you put yourself in a candidate's seat, which you and I have been candidates before, it's all you want, just communication.
That's it.
So, all right, there's another topic here that I'm really interested to hear your perspective on, because I just thought of this as we were talking, but how much emphasis or really thought has been put into we'll call it the interviewer's experience, right? So on your team, so you're responsible, or your team's responsible for creating an interview process internally. And not only for the TA team, but also for the technical hiring managers, right?
Yep.
And so how involved or how much emphasis has been put on that aspect in regards to training or surveys or getting them to look at things differently? Curious to your thoughts there.
Quite a bit, because they're a huge part of the process. And it's still iterative, and I'll talk about that in a second. But one of my ultimate goals is I want to have a whole interview team full of like recruiters out there interviewing people, so that we're making the best decisions possible every time. So some of the stuff that we've done, I would say that the first thing that we did, and someone on my team brought this to us, was changing the way that we write our job descriptions. So we moved away a couple of years ago from the standard job description to more of a performance-based job description. So working with the hiring manager to really map out, what is this person going to be doing every day in their job? So when you read one of our job descriptions, it's not the basic generic cookie cutter job description you see out there. It's very specific, and you, as a candidate and as someone that's going to be interviewing somebody, you understand what that person's going to be doing every day. So that's sort of on the front line. We built an interview guide, a really robust interview guide, with competency-based questions based on all of our, values and, sort of core competencies that we have as a company. So we send that out to every person before they interview, so that they could open this interview guide and say, okay, if I want to talk to this person about strategic thinking, here's a bunch of questions that I could ask. So we make it very easy for them to do that. And then for the last couple of years, we've been, as part of onboarding, it's not even just an optional thing, it's required. We do interview training with every employee in the company, not just managers, every employee. And we've gotten really good feedback on that process. So it's teaching people how to do competency, something called STAR-based interviewing. But even more foundational than that, it's how do you ask questions in the right way to get the most robust data and information on that candidate as you can, right? Because what typically happens in interviews is a couple of things, I think, is outside of the recruiter, people basically focus almost their entire interview on the technical. They're not focused on the non-technical side of things, which is also which is very important. But they also ask a lot of questions in a leading way, where it's, hey, Chris, you're going to be managing people in this role. Are you okay with that? And you say, yes. And they say, great. And then in the debrief, they say, yeah, Chris had no problem managing a team, but we have no idea what Chris's management style is like. Is his management style going to work here? Is he a good manager? What's he like? How does he motivate his team? So we teach people how to ask questions in a way that elicits specific examples from the candidates. So, and then what we've also done is, and we heard this actually right around the beginning of COVID, when I was talking to people as we were thinking through the interview process, what's working, what's not working. One of the things that I heard from a lot of people was, I don't know what my responsibility is on the interview team. Like, I don't know what the manager wants me to talk to the person about. I know that I'm interviewing, I know what the job is, but I don't actually know what the manager wants me to talk to the person about. So what the recruiters do is they make sure that before any interview, the hiring manager does one of two things. Either one, they set up a pre-interview call, and the hiring manager will say, Chris, I want you to focus on these areas with the candidates. Joe, I want you to focus on these. Kim, I want you to focus on these areas. So that way there's no overlap and we're getting at everything that's important. Or at the very least, sending an email to the interview team and assigning everybody a responsibility. And then when we get into the debrief meetings, everybody had their task and their core responsibility, and we talk through that, and then we make a decision. And then the last thing I would say is, next year, we're going to be rolling out sort of an advanced interview training to the employees, which builds on what we did in the first one, but goes a lot deeper for folks to get them even that much more skilled at interviewing and listening and identifying red flags and eliminating bias from their process and things like that. So long story short, we do focus a lot on the interviewer's role in the process as well.
You know, it's interesting. I think individuals like you and I will take interviewing and the ability to interview for granted, right? It's something that we've been doing our whole careers, and we learned how to do it at a young age, and years later are still doing it. But that doesn't mean that if you're a scientist or you're a clinical researcher that you know how to interview well, right? And so I think it's up to a TA function to make sure that those skills are translated during an interview process. I also love the fact, and this goes back to the candidate experience as well, that each interviewer has a different topic. Because if you're a candidate, do you want to give the same answer 3 or 4 times? No, you don't. And you actually, as a candidate, you might start getting tired towards the end, and you might leave out details because you already told that story 2 or 3 times. And kind of breaking it out, I think, gives a candidate a fresh topic every time, and gives the interviewer some really good focus to go and debrief on. So I think that's great. There was one other individual who you actually know. He actually took that tactic, if you will, and put it into place. And I think they saw a lot of success with it. So it's a great strategy. So
Awesome.
It seems. Yeah. All right. So one last topic here, and this is actually the topic that you and I initially started talking about, and kind of how we ultimately connected. And it's actually a really, really relevant topic over the last, we'll call it 3 or 4 years. And I have a lot of different thoughts on this, but it's employer branding, right?
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot of ways to put out a brand in a lot of different extreme angles. And so when it comes to Intellia's brand, would love to hear what really got you into the employer branding piece and how you're executing on it.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up because I love this topic as well. And it goes back to what I said, earlier on in this conversation, where no one knew who we were. I learned pretty quickly when I got here that we were a special place, special science, special people, special culture, just a special organization. And it frustrated me that we didn't talk about that. And no one on the outside knew about that. And I didn't want candidates to just get a spiel from me or somebody else about how great it was. I wanted people to flock to Intellia because it seems like the place that I need to be. If you think about companies like Bluebird, 10 years ago, I didn't know anybody there, but based on all the external work that they were doing, to me, I was always like, that place seems like an amazing place to work. Like, it just seems like an awesome place. Or Google, like in the past, right? Where there's these companies and these brands that are built where you need to be a part of that. And I knew we could back that up because we had just an awesome culture and an awesome group of people. I just had to find a way to tell the world that. So that's how we got into it initially. And what we did is brought in like an external consultant, someone who specializes in this work. Because one of the other things that I didn't want this to be was, I don't want it to be an HR-driven initiative. Like a culture in an employer brand is not defined by HR. An employer brand is defined by the people that are at the company and the culture. And if I sit there and talk to them, they might not give me the good, the bad, and the indifferent. So we brought somebody in and she met with a huge chunk of our employee population to help us map out what is it that makes Intellia so special and so unique out there. So we went through that process and we had a tremendous amount of enthusiasm and employee participation in that project. And then what we did is we took that, and then my team and I, in partnership with the corporate communications team, started to action on it. We just played to what the employees told us is what they love about the company, how they're wired, what motivates them. And we've just woven that into everything that we do, our external branding, our job descriptions, our website, the way that we talk to candidates. So we're just building on what the employees told us makes us special. So it's cool stuff.
Yeah. What if I take it a level deeper?
Yeah.
What was that, right? How much of it was technical? Because obviously, gene therapy is cutting edge, so I have to assume some of that's around the technology. But I guess what was it specifically that makes, or that the staff felt makes the company so special?
Yeah. There's really 5 things that came out of this. The overarching theme is that you can achieve more at Intellia, that it's a company that really cares about employee development and growing people internally to be successful. And it's not a company, which is something you see in a lot of biotechs, where you need to come from a certain school, or you need to come from a certain lab, or you need to have a certain degree. To us, it's always about the people. And one of the things that a lot of employees commented on is, I didn't need to do CRISPR in college to be successful at Intellia. I get a PhD in CRISPR working at Intellia because the people teach it to me, and they want to teach it to me, and they want to help me be successful. So that was sort of an overarching theme, which weaves into kind of what I was just talking about, where it's a very, very helpful and supportive culture. I've worked in teams and I've worked at places in the past where you're kind of on your own to figure it out. At Intellia, one of the things that's sort of at our core, you always have somebody. It doesn't even matter if they even know if they're in your group or on your team. There's always somebody willing to help you and raise their hand to say, "Hey, where can I help you here? I know you got a lot on your plate." So everybody always feels supported at every step of the way. And then our 3 core pillars, and these are on our website too. One of them, to your first point about the technical, we don't hire anybody that's not motivated by our science, and specifically our mission, which is to cure diseases. So everybody in the company is completely driven and motivated to cure life-threatening disease. So that's number one. If you're not motivated by our science, if you're motivated by our money or growth or other things that are not related to our science, like if the science is secondary to you, it's not gonna work here. One of the interesting things that came out of this is that we learned that our employees are very motivated to do good things in the world. So it goes beyond just work, doing things charitably or doing things to better the planet, just doing things to help people outside of the office. That's something we make sure we really harness that as a company. We do a lot of work externally, whether it's scholarship foundations or mentoring programs or donations to charity or doing team events at different organizations that are helping the homeless or people that have addiction problems. Like, it's something that really drives our employees. It goes beyond just Intellia. And then the last thing that came out of this, and we named our podcast, ironically, our podcast is called Imagine the Possibilities with Intellia, and the possibilities are limitless. So people that love the opportunity to be able to try new things and fail, and that's okay, and be able to just do things that you never thought were possible from a scientific perspective or just from a work perspective, like that door and that opportunity is here at Intellia. So for people, it's a huge motivator for them. Like, I'm not in a little box just doing one thing. Like, I have the opportunity to really be creative and really explore new opportunities and new ways of doing things. So that's something we make sure we look for in people as well and reiterate. So those are all the sort of the themes that that came out of this.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, you sold me, man. I would love to work there. So where do I sign up?
Come on in, man. Happy to have you. I haven't talked about that in a while. Like actually I remember when I talked about that with the whole company, it was just, no, it's so exciting because it's not me saying this. Like this came from them. Like all of that information came from the employees. So I think when they see it and they hear it, they know it's authentic. It's because it came from the people. So,
I mean, that's something that James Ellis and I talked about, who you know, James Ellis.
Yep.
And him and I talked about in employer branding. I think it's pretty clear when it's authentic versus when it's manufactured.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there is some manufactured employer branding out there, right? As there is in all marketing and advertising. But I think the authenticity in the long run will speak for itself and really help build a great culture and a great, and just it leads to building a great brand.
It does. I said this to James recently when I was talking to him on his podcast, is that one of the really cool things that I've found at Intellia that just sort of validates all of this is that, when I interview with people, I ask them how the interview process go, or even after they start, how the interview process go. And one of the things I hear all of the time is that people say, everybody explained the culture the exact same way. And that we don't tell people what to say. We don't give them a script. Like there's no rules, it's just, they ask you, what do you think the culture's like? And you explain what you think the culture's like. And so when everybody's sort of echoing a similar sentiment, it tells you that it's authentic and it's who we are. So candidates really remark on that as it's really good to hear like a similar message from everybody. It sounds like it's the type of place I want to work at.
Yeah.
So that makes me happy.
Totally. And it makes your job easier, right?
Yeah. It does.
There's consistency there. That's awesome. Well, Shaun, this is great. I mean, is there anything else you want to discuss or any advice you have for your colleagues in the TA space in biotech right now?
It's tough sledding out there right now for all of us. The market's not great. And we've seen a lot of, people unfortunately impacted by layoffs and everything. But I would say it's important to keep your foot on the gas. And even if you're not hiring that much, like we're not hiring a ton right now, it's important to not lose sight of what's important. And it's being empathetic to the candidates that are interviewing. And it goes back to what we talked about. It's now more than ever with, a lot of people looking for jobs and not a lot of supply or not a lot of demand out there. We need to make sure that we're creating an optimal experience for them because eventually it's going to turn back around and it's going to pick back up. And we want them to come, bang down our door to come work for us when the opportunities are plentiful again. So don't take for granted that I guess my advice is don't take for granted that it's a bad market and that when you're interviewing candidates, you might be the only opportunity they have, and operate as if those candidates have 5 different job offers and are evaluating, 10 different companies, and don't lose sight of that because it will make a positive impact now, but also in the future.
Absolutely. Well, it's a great advice and it's a great message. So thank you.
You bet. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Talent Therapy Podcast with Chris Tamburini. This show is for entertainment purposes only and is copywritten by Rana and Vance, LLC.